Rick Santorum. Rick Santorum, where have you been? Did you leave the country or something?
Hello, Mark.
Where have you been?
Been working
behind
the scenes trying to get some health care reform passed.
All right. Senator Rick Santorum, an old friend of mine I never hear from anymore. Now, let me ask you a question, Rick Santorum. You are one of the minds behind this proposal that's called Graham-Cassidy, et cetera, et cetera. Can you give my audience, this stuff gets complicated and there's a lot of background static, the basics of what's being proposed here?
This is really trying to do a redo of what we did 21 years ago with welfare reform, which is take a federal program that wasn't working very well, that was just like Obamacare, spending a lot of money and not getting very good results, and turning it over to the governors and to the states, where federalism. I mean, you talk about federalism all the time on this program. This is an issue that should not be being dealt with at the federal level. You turn it back to the states, give them the flexibility and some resources, which is what we did in welfare reform. And the results in welfare reform, which, by the way, 23 Democratic senators voted for, including Joe Biden and John Kerry and Ron Wyden, who's the ranking member of the Senate Finance Committee. They voted for this, and they gave governors the opportunity to design a system that met the needs of the people in their particular state. And what happened? The welfare rolls got cut in half. The block grant that we put forward for welfare reform in 1996 has never been increased in 21 years. Why? Because governors became efficient. Stephen Moore has an article up talking about what happened in Rhode Island when they were given the flexibility to redesign their Medicaid program. You give governors and legislators a budget, a fixed amount of money, unlike these open-ended entitlements like Medicaid and Obamacare. You give them a fixed amount of money. You give them the flexibility to design a program, working with their local insurers and hospitals and doctors, and you create a local solution that fits the needs of Alaska, that's different than Florida, that's different than Rhode Island. And that's how you're going to get innovation. That's how you're going to drive down costs. And that's what we do in this bill. And it's that simple.
Aren't there other aspects to the bill, or am I wrong?
Really, I mean, there's a Medicaid block grant. So there's a block grant of Medicaid. It's called a per capita cap, but it's similar to a block grant. So we again take Medicaid from this open-ended entitlement where states, the more they spend, the more they get. That's a bad incentive. The biggest winners under Medicaid right now are California, New York, and Massachusetts. They spend an enormous amount of money under both Medicaid, traditional Medicaid, and Obamacare, which is an expansion of Medicaid. They get enormous amounts of money vis-a-vis the rest of the country. Why? Because they spend a lot of money. And so what we're saying is stop encouraging states to spend and waste money. Put them on a budget. Put Medicaid on a cap. Give them the flexibility to redesign the program without all these bureaucratic rules and regulations out of Washington. Just like we do with welfare, we put certain protections in. The idea that, for example, they're saying, you can't, you're going to be able to drop off people who have pre-existing condition. That's not true. But what we say is, states can come up with different ways to address this pre-existing condition issue, but as opposed to the way Obama mandated everybody to do it. So there's ways of handling pre-existing conditions, many ways that states used to do. Now we say you have to cover people with pre-existing condition, but states have flexibility as long as they provide and guarantee to provide affordable and accessible care for people with pre-existing condition. Those are the kinds of flexibility that drive down costs and create innovation.
You know, Rick Santorum, you may remember the Reagan administration.
Yep.
And I remember with the Department of Education, when we couldn't get rid of it, we took a Plan B.
Yep.
And the Plan B was, when it came to primary and secondary education, to block grant as much of those funds to the states as possible without the federal government meddling in state affairs. Do you remember that?
I do, and it really is a lesson. We worked with member Bob Carlson from the Reagan administration. We worked with him on welfare reform way back in the 90s, and it's the same lesson. It's a repeat of what Reagan taught us, which is, unfortunately, when you create a new entitlement, it's hard to get rid of that entitlement. Once you give people an entitlement, that's the reason you and I and so many people fought against Obamacare. But what we did is, under this bill, Taxes are cut by over $250 billion over the next 10 years. That's not bad. Spending is cut by $400 billion. That's not bad. We get the money and power out of Washington and into the 50 states. That's not bad. I mean, what is it for Republicans not to like about this? Could we do more? There was one person who voted against welfare reform in 1996, and he's a dear friend of mine, a conservative from North Carolina named Locke Faircloth, because we didn't cut enough taxes and we didn't cut enough spending. In the end, we've cut literally hundreds of billions of dollars in spending, and we've got lower poverty rates and better performance out of in people working who used to be just collecting a check. So the answer is you got to sometimes take what you got in a bad situation and make it and do the best with it you can.
And what about buying over state lines? Is that relevant in this debate?
Unfortunately, because of the way the Senate is limited as to what they can include in the bill, that's something. The only thing they can include in this bill are things that have a financial consequence on the federal government. That's what this reconciliation process is. And unfortunately, that doesn't have a.
But they can go back and do things like that.
Oh yeah,
right?
No. Look, this is the other thing. I mean, this is strike one. I mean, you mentioned Bernie Care and the optics of the bill that Graham-Cassidy being introduced the same day Bernie Care was introduced is really interesting. I don't know if you've mentioned this. You probably is because you get everything right. But I
have to have you on more often. Go ahead.
The optics of Bernie Sanders and 14 or 15 Democratic senators getting up and basically saying Obamacare is a failure. We need to go to single payer.
And Senator, and 180 million of you, your private health care is gone.
That's right.
It's gone. 180 million people dropped from their private health care.
But what they're saying is that Obamacare is a failure. Why would you introduce a new health care bill if the one you voted for worked? So they are implicitly saying Obamacare is a failure. They're saying the answer is get rid of private health care, throw everything to Washington, and have Washington decide what. And our solution is get everything out of Washington, get it back into the states and the local communities, let doctors and hospitals, insurance companies, and patients in the states all across this country design a system that's best for them, where you have real input by your state legislator and your governor and people in your local community. That is the fundamental divide. That that from the basic. That's the difference between Republicans and Democrats, and that's the binary choice. I know there's some people say, "Oh, I'd like a better bill," or "I'd like something." That's not the choice. We either pass Graham-Cassidy, or we're going to go to Bernie Care because Obamacare is collapsing, and that's where every Democrat is going to go, and that's going to be where we end up on this train.
That's my great fear. You got to look at this a little bit strategically. And we're not surrendering our principles. As you said, you can go back for additional bites. Go back, Rand Paul. Go back. Make your case. Fight.
Yeah, the next bill that if we successfully pass, health care, guess what the next bill is that will have a lot more oomph because we've actually succeeded in something, and that's tax reform. You don't like the taxes in the health care bill? Well, take them out. You got a chance to do that in tax reform on the next bill that's coming up. There's always another bite of the apple. The one thing that Democrats have always done over the years, Mark, that Republicans have just not gotten it through their heads. Take what you can get.
All right, Rick, can you hold over? I want to talk to you about North Korea. Do you have a few more minutes?
Sure, absolutely.
That's Rick Santorum. I'm Mark Levin. We'll be right back.